we're going to look at how we can write plain text to disk. I should add that this is really only an approach where you want to export data for use potentially in another program. So say you've generated some data and you want it to be then put into an Excel spreadsheet or to be read as a text file or for some other purpose. If we're wanting to save the state of a program, we're likely to use a different method, something called serialization, which we'll cover in a later session. But if we want to write plain text to disk, we're going to use the approach we're going to talk about today. Now I have already here a simple program. What this program does is it declares an array list called vegetables, which is an array list of strings, and we create a scanner, and then we create a loop that would otherwise run entirely if we don't break out of it. What it does is it prints a message to the user asking them to type a vegetable name or just press enter to exit. We then read what the user types in. If they don't type anything, i.e. the input is empty, we break out of the loop and we finish the application. Otherwise, we take what they've written and we add it to our vegetables array. Okay, but what I would like to do, write the vegetables to file. Okay, so to do that, we use a similar approach to reading files, except we use a different package. We used java.io last time. This time we're going to use java.nio for new input output. We do have to create a location of the file to which we want to write, but instead of using the file type, we actually use a path type. So we say path, okay, and that's imported java.nio.file.path. Okay, so notice we're in the NIO package. We give it a name, so this is going to be the location of where we want to save the file. Okay, and then we don't do like new file in this case, we actually do paths.get, okay, and we pass in the location of the file that we want. Okay, so I want to save it in the data folder that we used from the previous video, but I don't want to overwrite my artists. I actually want to create a file called vegetables.txt. We don't have to use a TXT extension. One benefit of doing that is that if we then come to open it ourselves, it will open with something that's ready to handle a text file on the Mac or the PC or the Linux machine that we're using. So if we use a file extension that makes sense for the file type, it will make opening up in another program a bit more straightforward. Obviously, we don't want to use a type that's used for something else. So if I put a .docx extension on it, it's not a valid Word document, so Word might have trouble opening it. Okay, but it is plain text, so using .txt makes sense. Now, the other thing we need to do is to specify the character set used to save the file. So we can obviously store text in different formats, okay, and a very common one is something called UTF-8. Okay, now we have to create something that represents that character set in order to be able to write the file to disk. Okay, so we do that. We can say charset. Again, that exists in the NIO package. Hitting enter will import it. I'm going to call it UTF-8 because that's the character set I'm going to create, and I can say charset dot for name, and then I can pass in the name of the set we're going to use. Okay, now it's giving me a warning here. It's probably telling me that there's okay, so it's suggesting that I don't have to supply it in this particular manner, and in fact there is a predetermined constant called standard charsets.utf8, and we can use that instead. So if I click that, you'll see standard charsets, and if we were to do a dot here, you'll see they're actually US ASCII, ISO 8859, but there's UTF-8, so we can use UTF-8 and that will do the job. Either approach will be fine. We can use charset for name or we can use standard charsets.utf8. Both will have the same end result. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is to write our file to disk, and because it's an array list of strings, it can be very easily written to disk. And to do that, we say files.write, and then we have to pass in, there's various different things. Well, one we need to import it, so let's import it first. And then there are various different parameters we can pass to this. Okay, the first one is always a path. So I think we called our path location, so we can pass location to it. Okay, secondly, we can either pass in an array of bytes. I don't have an array of bytes. What I have is an array list. Okay, and the second two options specify that we can pass in something that is iterable. Okay, well, we can iterate through a collection, so that's good. And you'll notice that in the brackets, it's got to be something that extends a char sequence. Well, a string extends a char sequence. So by default, an array list of strings is a perfectly valid object that we can pass in to save. If you've been reading around the subject, you might know there are different types of collections. So we don't have just have array list. We've got there's a generic sort of list interface, but there's other types of list that we could use as well. And as long as that was a list of strings or some other something else that was a type of character sequence, then would be fine. Okay, so my list of I think I called it vegetables. Okay, and then we could leave it at that, but I think it's recommended that we supply a character set. So you'll see here we've got two more options. This open option, that basically means you can supply additional options, but you don't actually have to supply them. The three dots here, this means this is what's called a var args, so variable number of arguments, of which we cannot supply in if we want to. So if we supply a character set, so I think we just called it UTF-8, that will meet this criteria here, and we can ignore this one here and not specify any further options because we don't need to. Okay. We have a similar problem to that which we had when we were reading files, and that is that we are not handling a possible IO exception because it might not be able to write to that file. Okay, possible reasons could be the program doesn't have authorization to write to the location that we're trying to save. It might not have write access. It might just be a read-only location. Something else could be using the file. We could have run out of disk space. So there's lots of things that could go wrong to prevent that from happening. Now, as long as I haven't got the file open and my file isn't full, it's probably going to be okay, but it could go wrong. So again, we write a try catch block. We wrap the code we want to execute in the try block. We then write catch. We catch the exception, which we typically call E, and specifically it was an IO exception. So we'll use the IO exception. It's possible that we can have more than one exception thrown. Different things can go wrong. In this case, there's only one thing that we're looking for. But you could write a block of code where more than one thing could go wrong, and we might want to catch each of those exceptions separately. So we're going to be quite specific here and catch the IO exception. Okay, and then we can put out a message saying the file could not be saved, and maybe just for our own benefit, we'll also print the message from the exception to see why it hasn't worked. Okay. So what I didn't do was demonstrate how this program worked before we wrote the code, so I'm going to comment all that out for now and just show you. So type of vegetable name, carrot, type of vegetable name, P. If I press enter, the program ends. Okay. What should happen now if I comment this code back in is that it should save it to a file in the data folder called vegetables.txt. So that doesn't exist at the moment. Okay. And you know, if I go here and go reveal in Finder, and I drag across that that folder, you'll see. Oh, trying to drag it across. I think I can't drag it across because I'm in full screen. You'll have to trust me on that one. There isn't an additional file in the data folder at present. But if we run it, let's run our code again. Carrot. P, we'll just enter. Okay, you should notice this vegetables file has just popped up here, and if we open that up, we can see it's got a carrot and a P in it. Now I've got to open IntelliJ. What will be interesting to see is whether it will still let me write to it. Can't spell sweet corn, but never mind. Okay, that's fine. You see that it changed at the point it wrote to it. What I'm going to try and do now is open it up in, I've got to open another screen in the text edit program on a Mac, and I'm going to try and run it again and see if that prevents me from saving to the file. Beetroot, still can't spell. Okay, so that has written it. Okay, so it's still allowed me to change the file. What I want to do is try and break it so I can't. So again, I'm going to see if I can change the file to be read only. Okay, so you can't see me doing this, but I'm going to change everybody's access to read only. Okay, and we'll just try and run our code again and see if it will block me from writing it. Okay, so there we go. So with the file, although you couldn't see me do it, I changed the permissions for the file and made it read only. We've got this error, the file could not be saved, and it tells us which file it's trying to say. If I change it back to read and write and run my code again, so I've changed it back to read and write, again you can't see it, I'm running out of vegetables now. There we go, and again you can see it updating in the file there. So that's how we can write to files. It's very easy to save the contents of an array list of strings to disk. We simply go back to our code. We create a path that represents the location of the file that we want to save it as. Okay. We create a character set, and we can use the standard character sets.utf8, or we can use the char set for name option. We try and write the file to disk. If it fails, we want to tell the user, and we might find out what has gone wrong. Again, you saw that even when I locked the file, it just said it couldn't save it. It didn't tell me why. So that might require a little bit more exploration, but it could be open in another program. It could be locked. Something else could be writing to it at the same time the disk could be full. There are reasons for that. Okay, so that's a simple introduction to writing files.